The cafeteria at the public university in Boston was nearly empty when Madison finished wiping down the last few tables. She wore a simple blue uniform, her brown hair tied back in a hurried bun. The early hours of the morning were her ally. She studied during the day and cleaned at night. Her life was built on invisible sacrifices. Across campus, a new employee was quietly starting his first shift as a night janitor. Oliver wore a low baseball cap, rubber gloves, and a name tag that didn't match his own. No one would recognize him as the CEO of the holding company funding half the university's scholarships. He wanted to see with his own eyes the worth of people when there was nothing to gain. The campus director greeted him with nothing more than an indifferent nod. To her, he was just another outsourced worker, and that was exactly what he wanted: to disappear into the corridors, far from the flattery, far from the pressure of being who everyone expected him to be. At 3 a.m. in the back room of the cafeteria, Madison entered pushing a cart full of cleaning supplies. Her shoulders were heavy, but her eyes still held a spark. That's when she saw him for the first time, crouched down, trying to fix a broken mop bucket with duct tape. She didn't laugh. Instead, she knelt beside him and offered a stronger roll of tape from her pocket. "This one works better. Learned that from the plumbing guys in the engineering wing," she said with an honest smile. Oliver accepted it silently, surprised by her kindness. She didn't ask his name. She just helped and went back to cleaning. That ease, that lack of judgment, disarmed him. At the end of his shift, he watched her walk out the service door with a patched-up backpack on her shoulders. The sky was still dark, but Madison walked with purpose. For some reason, Oliver couldn't look away. It wasn't pity. It was fascination. Who was this girl? The next day, he made sure to be in the same hallway as the library. And there she was, cleaning the windows with steady motions, softly humming to herself. When a student dropped a book, she bent down to pick it up before he could. "Careful, that one's heavy. Not worth a free hernia," she joked. Her lightness intrigued him. People like that weren't common, not with eyes that still shined, after 8 hours of hard work. He wanted to know more but held back. The disguise still mattered. Seeing how people treat those who have nothing was the real test. Madison, in turn, noticed him, but said nothing. She was discreet with everyone. Yet something about this man piqued her curiosity. The polite gestures, the gaze that seemed to listen even when he said nothing. And that was rare. Someone who really listened. One rainy night, the cafeteria roof began to leak. While other workers grumbled, Madison grabbed buckets and mops and started containing the water. Oliver joined her without a word. Amid the dripping, chaos, and spilling coffee, their eyes met. "Been working here long?" he asked for the first time. She looked surprised, then smiled. 2 years. I know where each leak starts. One of them even has a name." He smiled back, and for a moment, time stood still. The conversation was brief, but real. Oliver learned more about her life in 5 minutes than he ever had from millionaire boardroom meetings. She cared for a sick mother, studied education, and dreamed of opening a community school. And there was no bitterness in her voice, only purpose. Deep down, Madison found it strange that someone new listened to her with such genuine interest. But as she always did, she offered trust. She was one of those people who believe until life proves otherwise. And maybe that's why she carried scars she never showed. After that night, Oliver began leaving anonymous notes near her locker, motivational phrases, poems hidden among dish towels. She never knew who left them, but she read every one. "Someone sees you," said one. And that was enough. One ordinary morning, Madison found a rose wrapped in newspaper where the notes used to be. She smiled and took it home. Maybe it was just a random gesture, but deep down she hoped it was from him, from the strange janitor who listened with his eyes. But as feelings grew in silence, the real world marched on. And it was cruel to those who dared to dream. Madison was falsely accused by an arrogant supervisor of damaging a piece of equipment. The humiliation was public and unfair. Oliver watched from a distance, fists clenched. His instinct was to act, reveal who he was, and right the wrong. But he couldn't. Not yet. This had to be resolved the right way. It was time to start building the justice she deserved. That night, he left her locker locked with a note. Good people don't always win the first battle, but they win in the end. She read it, felt her eyes sting, and sat on the laundry room floor surrounded by mops and buckets to cry in silence. The bond between them was now invisible, but strong. Something that went beyond words. A glance, a gesture, a presence that said, "You're not alone." For the first time in years, Oliver felt his heart move for someone, and it wasn't out of guilt or duty. When Madison walked out that night, the rain had stopped. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Whoever you are, thank you." And Oliver, standing at the end of the hallway, murmured back, though she couldn't hear him, "You don't know it yet, but I'm your greatest ally." The days that followed were quiet, but something had shifted between them. When they passed each other in the hallways, they didn't speak, but there was mutual recognition. His eyes searched for hers, and Madison, though she tried to ignore, it felt her heart race whenever she saw him. Oliver watched her routine with quiet attention. How she always arrived early, how she treated other workers with kindness, even those who ignored her. There was dignity in her smallest gestures, and it impressed him more than any boardroom meeting ever had. One night, she helped a visually impaired student find his way back to the dorms after the library closed. Oliver saw it from afar. She didn't just guide him, she spoke to him as if they'd known each other for years. The scene moved him deeply. That was what he admired most. Pure empathy, with no expectation of anything in return. For the first time in a long while, he felt proud to be there, even in disguise, learning from someone so genuine. He began leaving more notes in her locker. Not advice this time, but words describing what he saw. "You bring light where others only see shadows." Madison found it odd, but never questioned it. Those notes were the only affection she received during that phase of her life. During a campus blackout, everyone panicked over the power outage. Madison, however, took charge of the students trapped inside the library. She lit flashlights, passed out water bottles, and kept everyone calm. Hidden among the bookshelves, Oliver watched her in silent admiration. That night, he stepped a little closer. "Are you always like this?" he asked softly, trying not to sound intrusive. She looked surprised, then smiled slightly. "Like what?" He hesitated. "The kind who brings order to chaos without needing attention." She laughed. "Life trained me." The phrase stuck with him. Life trained me. How many battles had she fought to say that so naturally? Oliver, so used to solving problems with checks, was beginning to understand the real power of presence and action. They started meeting more often in the early hours. Short conversations between tasks. They talked about books, little dreams, the taste of stale cafeteria coffee. He never revealed anything about himself, but listened to everything about her. Madison started calling him her mystery poet, teasing him about the notes. He would hide a smile and reply, "If I were a poet, I'd write about you." She would just roll her eyes and laugh. But inside, those words stirred something in her. During a shift change, she brought him a slice of cake left over from a culinary event. She handed it to him casually. "I know you like simple things." He accepted it, swallowing the emotion. No one had done something like that for him in years. Sometimes Oliver wondered how far he could carry on the disguise. He knew he was crossing a line between curiosity and real feelings. But it was too late. What he felt for Madison no longer fit under observation. She was unlike anyone he had ever known. While the women at his dinners wore heels and rehearsed smiles, Madison wore worn-out sneakers and sincerity in her eyes. And he had never felt so alive as he did beside her. One night, she looked more worn out than usual. Her mother had suffered a spike in blood pressure, and the public hospital had delayed care. Even exhausted, she showed up for her shift. Oliver watched her mop the floor, eyes red, posture still steady. "If you ever want to talk, I'm a good listener," he said, with rare tenderness. She paused, then replied, "I know, and that's dangerous." He understood exactly what she meant. She was beginning to trust him, and for someone like her, that was a huge risk. The bond between them was growing in silence, not in kisses or declarations, but in glances that said more than words, in quiet help, in cups of coffee shared over muffled laughter. It was all real, but also fragile, like wet paper. Oliver began to fear the moment he'd have to tell her the truth. Who he was, why he was there, and worse, what if she thought it had all been an act? But at the same time, he couldn't give up the purity of their connection. One of the older janitors, suspicious of the new guy, once said Oliver was too polite to be scrubbing floors. Madison just laughed. Maybe he's just someone who's seen what money can't buy. She had no idea how right she was. On a freezing night, he forgot his gloves. She noticed his red hands and handed her own over without hesitation. "You look more like a museum curator than a janitor," she joked. He chuckled. "And what if I told you I used to own a few things?" She looked at him, serious. "If you told me that, I'd say it doesn't matter what you have. What matters to me is who you are when no one's watching." Oliver felt the ground shift beneath him for a moment, because for the first time, someone truly saw who he was. The nights began to take on a strange glow for Oliver. The time spent with Madison was his refuge, but also a constant reminder of the lie he carried. With each of her smiles, his fear of the truth coming out grew stronger. And that day approached. Like a storm on the horizon, he had to decide, keep the disguise or risk everything. A new student-led project was being launched by the university, and Madison signed up with courage. She submitted a proposal for an adult literacy program focused on the local community. The director, arrogant and elitist, mocked the idea under his breath. Oliver was nearby, sweeping the hallway, and heard everything. His blood boiled, but there was nothing he could do. Not yet. The next day, Madison saw her name crossed off the presentation list. The reason? Project lacks relevance. She didn't argue, but her eyes lost their spark for a few hours. Oliver found her sitting alone on the side staircase, staring into nothing, the project folder on her lap. He sat beside her without a word, just stayed. "Do you think I'm being naive?" she asked, looking up at the sky. "I think you're too brave to give up because of one idiot," he replied. She gave a small smile. "You always say the right thing at the wrong time." It was her way of saying thank you. And in that moment, Oliver knew he had to do something. Using his influence, he forwarded Madison's proposal to an educational institute he admired. Without signing as CEO, he simply asked for a fair review. Days later, the institute responded, praising the initiative and inviting Madison for an interview. She received the email with tears in her eyes, unaware of where the miracle had come from. "Maybe the universe heard me," she told Oliver with a smile. He only nodded, swallowing the secret. But their growing closeness began to attract attention. One of the cleaning supervisors, nosy and malicious, started watching them closely. "A little too interested in the new janitor," she whispered in the hallway. Soon the gossip started. People said Madison was infatuated with a co-worker and that it could harm her reputation. The administration called her in for a preventive talk and suggested she distance herself. Madison left the room with her face burning with anger, shame, and helplessness. That night she avoided Oliver. She didn't even look him in the eye. He noticed, but respected it. Alone in the maintenance room, he punched the wall and felt the real pain of not being able to defend her. For the first time, the lie didn't feel like a plan. It felt like cowardice, and it hurt more than he expected. The next day, she showed up with swollen eyes, but her posture upright. She asked to speak with him behind the campus. "Be honest. Are you hiding something from me?" she asked, straight to the point. Oliver froze. It wasn't time. Not yet. But his silence was the loudest answer. Madison shook her head, disappointed. "I trusted you. I opened up." Her teary eyes left him breathless. "If you're playing with me, you better stop now." He tried to reach for her, but she stepped back. I don't want metaphors. I want the truth. And you're not ready for it. After that day, Madison avoided every shift he was on. She requested schedule changes and isolated herself even more. The social project moved forward, but her energy seemed divided. Oliver, in turn, felt like an imposter on the edge of a cliff. He was afraid of losing her, and afraid of revealing himself. Then came the announcement. The university's director revealed a surprise visit from one of the institution's top investors. A powerful, discreet name, almost a campus legend. Madison didn't think much of it, but Oliver knew. The curtain was about to fall, and the face behind the legend was his. The night before the visit, Oliver ran into Madison in a back hallway. She was hurriedly taking out the trash. When she saw him, she looked away, but he stepped closer. I made a mistake, and I will tell you everything. Just give me a little more time. She didn't reply. She just kept working in silence. A jealous coworker, annoyed by the attention Oliver received, decided to snoop through his belongings. He found a forgotten corporate card in the backpack with Oliver's full name. Realizing its significance, he rushed to show the supervisor. That piece of information, delivered with malice, would change everything. The next morning, the bomb dropped. The gossip spread like wildfire. The janitor is the millionaire who funds this place. The entire university erupted in whispers and speculation. Madison heard the buzz in the hallway and froze. She ran to the maintenance room, but he was no longer there. In the cafeteria, everyone was talking. Some praised Oliver as a genius in disguise. Others mocked him as a bored rich boy. But Madison felt only one thing: pain. The pain of having trusted someone who hid not only his truth, but maybe his feelings too. She wandered the campus halls in a daze until she reached the old storage shed where they used to talk. There, she found the final note he had left. If I'd told you who I was from the beginning, would you have listened? She folded the paper with trembling hands. She sat on the cold floor of the shed, exactly where they had once shared cake. The memories cut deep. His laugh, his watchful eyes, the silences filled with presence. It had all been real. But it had also been a lie. And now she didn't know what hurt more. Meanwhile, Oliver stood in the university's administrative building, preparing for the official investor meeting. His face was serious, suit flawless, hair neatly combed. But his eyes were lost. He knew that in revealing himself, he risked losing her forever. Outside, the city carried on, indifferent. But inside the university, two hearts fought, in silence. One seeking redemption, the other answers. And between them, the question neither dared speak aloud. Is it still possible to trust? The revelation of Oliver's true identity spread like wildfire. The quiet janitor so many had overlooked was none other than the owner of the foundation funding the university. Madison tried not to let it break her, but everything inside her felt like it was collapsing. The words he had spoken, the looks, the gestures, it all felt like theater. She hated herself for believing so deeply. She felt used, deceived, and worse, she missed him. Oliver, on the other hand, was drowning in guilt. He had never intended for things to go this far. The disguise had been a test not for others but for himself. He wanted to see if he could still trust, still feel, still be seen for who he was, not for what he had. And Madison, she had seen him before all of it. That's why it hurt so much to see her distant, hurt, and he knew it was time to stop hiding. Determined to come clean, Oliver scheduled an internal meeting with professors and staff. He stepped onto the makeshift stage with a firm posture but a heavy heart. He said in front of everyone that his presence there had never been a game, that he had gone undercover to understand how the university treated those who were invisible, and that in the process, he met someone who taught him more than any investment ever had. He didn't say her name, but everyone understood. Madison listened from afar, hidden behind the auditorium door. His words cut her like a blade, not because they were false, but because they felt too true, and that made everything more confusing. How could someone so powerful have allowed himself to truly see her? How could he have gotten involved with no ulterior motives? For the first time in a long while, Madison didn't know what to believe. That afternoon he went to look for her at the dorm, but she wasn't there. He sat on the building steps for hours, waiting. In his mind, the memories replayed: her smile, the notes, the piece of cake, the traded gloves. Every gesture from her had been genuine, and he had ruined it all with silence. When Madison returned from the library, she froze at the sight of him. She hesitated, then approached. "I'm not here to explain. I'm here to apologize," he said quietly. She crossed her arms, trying to stay composed. "You had so many chances to tell me the truth, but you chose to test me like I was part of some experiment." Oliver swallowed hard. "It wasn't like that. I needed to be someone no one catered to, just to see what the world was really like." Madison shook her head. "Well then, welcome to our world. It hurts here." He tried to step closer, but she backed away. "You don't understand, Oliver. I opened up to you. I told you about my mother, my fears, my dreams, and now it feels like I said all that to a character." She was crying, but the tears fell silently, just as she always did. He wanted to say it had all been real, that every second with her was the most truthful of his life. But she didn't want words. She wanted time. In the days that followed, Madison threw herself into work and studies. She declined invitations, ignored gossip, and avoided any mention of Oliver. Her literacy project had been approved by the Institute without knowing he had submitted it. That left her even more conflicted. Had he done it out of kindness or guilt? Her heart wanted to believe, but her mind screamed, "Protect yourself." Oliver, meanwhile, chose not to pressure her. Instead, he began changing from within. He canceled lavish events, redirected funds to social projects, and launched a full-ride scholarship program based on silent merit. Madison had inspired every step, and he wanted the world to know, but more than that, he wanted her to see. To understand this wasn't just regret, it was transformation. One rainy night, Madison slipped outside the library. She twisted her ankle and lay on the wet ground, trying to get up on her own. Oliver, who was discreetly checking campus facilities, saw the scene and ran to her. "You don't have to," she started, but stopped. For the first time in days, she let him help her, and in the touch of their hands there was something neither of them could deny. There was still feeling. He carried her to the infirmary, in silence, sat beside her while the nurse examined her. "You're still the strongest person I've ever met," he said, staring at the floor. She sighed. "Strength gets tired too." For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. But the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was full of longing, of everything that had been, and what still might be. When they left, he wrapped her in his coat and walked her to the dorm. Before going inside, she turned to him. "Why did you stay there that night, after I walked away?" He took a deep breath. "Because even when you don't want to hear me, I still want to listen to you." Madison bit her lip, fighting her feelings, but she didn't reply. She just stepped inside and let the door close gently behind her. The next night, Madison found a small box in the maintenance locker. Inside was a simple flower-shaped brooch made of wire and beads. It was identical to the one she had made years ago for her mother, but lost in a flood. How had Oliver found it? Her hands trembled as she held it, and for the first time in days, she cried openly. Alongside the brooch was a note. "You lost this before you met me. Now I want to give back what time took from you." Madison remembered telling him about it months ago. A small story, a forgotten memory. But he had listened. He had remembered, and in that gesture she saw the man she had known behind the lie. And her heart began to soften. In one of her classes, Madison presented her project to a group of younger students. She spoke about the power of education as a new beginning, about how teaching someone to read is also teaching them to dream. Oliver was there at the back without her knowing, and when he heard those words, he knew he couldn't wait any longer. It was time to show her he wasn't there out of pity, but out of love. The next day, a university meeting was opened to the community. Oliver asked to speak. Before hundreds of people, he talked about privilege, regret, and truth. I hid thinking I needed to test others, but I was the one being tested. And I only saw my own worth was when I was seen by someone who expected nothing in return. The crowd applauded. Madison, standing in the back, couldn't hold back her tears. After the event, he walked straight toward her, ignoring all the stares. You were my compass in this place. I just wanted to know if the world still had real people. And then I found you. She took a deep breath. And now? He looked into her eyes. Now I don't want to hide anymore. I just want to be wherever you are, even if that means standing outside. She trembled, but she didn't run. In the empty university hallways, they walked side by side in silence. The world seemed to pause just for that moment to exist. She didn't have all the answers yet. He still carried guilt and fear. But there, between quiet steps and soft glances, a new beginning felt possible. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. That night, Oliver left a rose in her locker, like in the beginning, but this time it was signed with his name. Madison picked up the flower, smiled, and for the first time since the revelation, wrote something back. I still don't trust what you have, but maybe I'm starting to trust who you are. And she left the note in the same place. It was the first step. Small but real. The pain was still there. The wounds hadn't disappeared, but there was room for rebuilding. And deep down they both knew, when love is true, it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be honest. After that exchange of letters, Madison and Oliver kept a respectful distance. There was no breakup, but also no surrender. It was as if they were both walking along the edge of an invisible line, testing the boundaries between forgiveness and doubt. Oliver remained present but never intrusive. He followed her projects, watched from afar. Madison carried a heart at war, torn between wanting to believe and the fear of being hurt again. Their classmates began to notice the change. She smiled less, became more introspective. Some attributed it to exhaustion, others to the public exposure she faced after Oliver's revelation. But no one knew the truth. Madison was trying to maintain her dignity while learning to deal with her own heart. It was hard to watch someone try so hard to prove they had changed, and at the same time, remember how deeply the first wound burned. Oliver, for his part, avoided anything that might pressure her. He visited the places where she worked, left anonymous donations, funded improvements quietly. He wasn't seeking credit. It was as if he wanted to give back to the world the goodness she had shown him, even if he never had her by his side again. He watched her from afar, in classrooms, among books and posters, always so steady, so committed. And he wondered, how is she still so strong? One night, Madison had a panic attack trying to balance school, work, and project interviews. Alone, in her dorm room, she sat on the floor struggling to breathe. Her roommate called for help, and to her surprise, it was him who came. Oliver had donated an emotional monitoring device to the campus, and when he heard about the emergency, he rushed there himself. "Are you okay?" he asked, kneeling beside her. She shook her head, eyes still wet. "I'm just tired of being strong all the time." He gently took her hand. "You don't have to be strong right now, just breathe." And together, they breathed in silence. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment, it was everything. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to be vulnerable in front of him. After the scare, he took her to a small, campus garden. They sat on a wooden bench surrounded by plants and silence. "I never wanted to be another burden for you, Madison." She looked at the ground. "You weren't a burden, just a shock." Her honesty disarmed him. "I just wanted you to see who I was before you knew what I had," she replied softly. "And maybe I did, but I was afraid I was wrong." The days that followed were calm, but confusing. Madison returned to classes, Oliver to his corporate obligations. But there was space between them, a space that held everything they had felt and everything they didn't yet know how to express. She began writing letters she never sent. He began designing a social project inspired by her, a support network for working students. Both were turning pain into purpose. In one of those letters, Madison wrote, "You showed me that even the powerful can feel invisible, and I showed you that the invisible have power too. I just don't know if we're strong enough to meet in the middle." She didn't have the courage to send it, but she needed to write. It was how she made sense of her emotions. Because loving someone who lied is like rebuilding a house without knowing if the foundation is still there. Meanwhile, the media had picked up on the undercover millionaire story. Sensational headlines flooded the internet, portraying Oliver as eccentric, reckless, even manipulative. Madison saw the news and felt her stomach twist, because she knew the real story was far more human than the headlines made it seem. He wasn't a character. He was a man trying to rediscover his worth, even if clumsily. At the university, the judgments began. Some students treated him like a celebrity. Others avoided him, suspicious of his motives. But Madison watched from afar and saw what no one else saw. He didn't smile like before. He didn't walk with the same confidence, and in his eyes there was always an unspoken question. Does she forgive me? One day, while visiting a community library, Madison found a mural with a photo of herself. Below, a plaque read, "Project, Inspiration, Madison Wells." She froze. Next to it was a QR code that led to a video. In the video, Oliver spoke about the importance of listening to those on the margins. And with an emotional voice, he said, "It was someone without privilege who showed me how to use mine with purpose." Madison cried silently in front of the screen. It stirred something deep inside her, because it wasn't about grand gestures. It was about recognition. He hadn't used her name for promotion. He had used it for honor, for truth. And that weighed more than any bouquet or fancy dinner. For the first time, Madison thought maybe forgiveness wasn't about forgetting, but remembering without it hurting so much. Still, wounds remained. Some nights she relived the moment she found out everything. The feeling of betrayal, the shame of falling for someone behind a mask. And then she would ask herself, would he have even noticed me if I were just a janitor? But the answer would always come, like a whisper inside her. He saw you before he knew your name. Oliver, meanwhile, avoided any new approach. He respected her timing. But inside, he battled his longing like a man walking through winter without a coat. He remembered her laugh, the way she furrowed her brow when thinking, the way she cared for everyone without asking for anything in return. He wanted to run to her. But now, silence was the greatest act of love he could offer. In a private investors' meeting, someone asked why he was shifting the company's focus to social impact. He answered sincerely, "Because I met someone who taught me that profits don't fill emptiness, but gestures do." One advisor smirked. "Sounds like love. Really messed with your head." Oliver simply smiled. Thankfully, it did. Madison's mother, slowly recovering, noticed the shift in her daughter. "You seem lighter and sadder at the same time," she said. Madison gave a shy smile. "Maybe I'm learning to accept that not everything has to be controlled." Her mother squeezed her hand. "And maybe what's real always finds its way back." Madison held on to those words like a seed. One afternoon, Oliver passed by the classroom where Madison taught young adults. He paused at the door, unnoticed. He saw her teaching with passion, using simple examples, making everyone laugh. That's where she shined, without a stage, without fame. And he thought, if she's happy without me, I'll accept it. But if there's still space, I'll come back with everything I am. Madison noticed him. She didn't look directly, but smiled while speaking to her students. That smile said more than any words. It was a quiet message. I saw you. I know you're here. And inside, she felt a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe she was ready to listen. Maybe she was ready to start again. That night, she returned to the dorm and reopened all the letters she had written to him. She read them one by one. She cried, smiled, sighed. Then she chose one, the most sincere, the rawest. She folded it carefully, placed it in an envelope, and wrote only, "To the one I still choose to see," then walked out and left it in the locker of the old maintenance room. Hours later, Oliver found it. He opened the envelope with trembling hands, and as he read, tears fell before he even realized. At the end of the letter, one line, "If you still want to hear me, I'll be in the garden tomorrow." And in that moment he knew the time for distance had ended. It was time to find her again, with everything that was true. The university garden awoke wrapped in a light mist, as if the world were whispering that something new was about to begin. Oliver arrived early, well before their agreed time. He walked among the flowers with his hands in his pockets, trying to contain the nerves. He had given speeches to hundreds, made million-dollar decisions, but waiting for Madison was his greatest vulnerability. This wasn't business, it was emotion. His soul laid bare. When she appeared, hair tied back, wearing an oversized sweater, she looked like part of the landscape, simple, steady, real. They looked at each other for long seconds before saying a word. There was baggage between them that couldn't be undone, only understood. Madison stepped closer, stopped in front of him, and said, "I read your speech. I saw the projects. But that's not why I came." He swallowed hard. "Then why did you come?" And she answered, "Because I still see you." They sat on the same bench where they'd once shared silences and coats. Oliver took a deep breath. "I lied to you, Madison, even when I was honest. In everything else, I started it wrong." She nodded. "And even so, I found myself trusting you, because you weren't a stranger. You were someone who saw what others didn't." He gave a faint smile. "And now, what do you see?" She whispered, "Someone who learned not to run." They talked for hours, about fear, about power, about wrong choices with right intentions. Oliver shared his lonely childhood, losing his mother at 12, his father's obsession with status, how he grew up hiding emotions because they were seen as weakness, and how, seeing her that first night, kneeling to pick up shards of porcelain, something in him cracked. For the first time, he wanted to belong somewhere, even if invisible. Madison listened closely. Her anger had turned to understanding, and her doubt into care. She told him about her mother, about becoming an adult at 14, about the jobs that shaped her. "You tried to run from the image they gave you. I never had one. I'm just now starting to see myself." And in that meeting of raw truths, something new was born. No longer fascination or fear, but intimacy. During their conversation, a group of students approached to congratulate her. She had been selected as a finalist for an Educational Youth Leadership Award. Oliver looked at her with genuine pride. Not because he had sponsored anything, but because she had gotten there on her own. "You belong on the stage," he said. She smiled shyly. "I prefer gardens." They laughed, sharing a peace they hadn't felt in a long time. In the days that followed, they began appearing together, quietly. No announcements, no public kisses. But the glances exchanged in the hallways said everything. The campus, once buzzing with gossip, now watched them in silence. There was respect in their closeness, and for Madison that was essential. She didn't want to be seen as the girl who got the millionaire, but as the one who helped him find himself again. The university board organized an event to present the new scholarship programs. Madison was invited as one of the speakers. She hesitated, but Oliver encouraged her. Use your voice. It changes more than any donation. On the day of the event, she stepped onto the stage in a simple dress, eyes steady. She told her story without embellishment, raw and real. And at the end, she dedicated her speech to all who remained kind even while invisible. After the event, the same press that once chased scandals surrendered to the narrative of resilience. The millionaire and the educator became a headline, but now with admiration, not ridicule. When interviewed, Oliver said, "If she hadn't looked me in the eye when I was just a guy holding a mop, I might have never looked into my own." Madison watched from a distance, moved, because now he was telling the truth publicly. On campus, an old cleaning supervisor was fired after investigations into abuse and discrimination. Oliver hadn't interfered directly, but ensured that silenced voices were finally heard. Madison was approached by other students who, inspired by her, wanted to form support and educational outreach groups. Slowly, she began to understand. Her story wasn't just hers. It belonged to everyone who had been invisible for too long. One night in the old maintenance room, Oliver led her in blindfolded. When she opened her eyes, she found a small space transformed into a community library. There were donated books, beanbags, paintings made by students. At the center, a plaque read, "The Madison Wells Room, where the voice of the one who listens is louder than the one who shouts." She covered her mouth, overcome with emotion. "You did this?" He replied, "You taught me how to see." That night ended with the two of them sitting on the floor, remembering beginnings, fears, silences. "I still don't know everything about you," she said. "Neither do I," he replied. "But I know that when I'm with you, I want to be better." Madison leaned her head on his shoulder. For the first time, without fear, without doubt, just presence. And that was love. The next weekend, Madison went back to the old cafeteria where it all began. It had been renovated, brightened, but still smelled like burnt coffee. She sat at the same table from that first night, now with a notebook in her lap. She began writing her own story, for the first time as the author. Oliver arrived minutes later holding 2 coffees. "Do you remember?" She smiled. "I never forgot." As she wrote, she realized she didn't have to guard herself all the time anymore. That love didn't mean disappearing. It meant being seen, and that yes, it was possible to trust again, as long as the other person walked the same path in truth. Oliver had learned that, not through speeches, but by living every mistake, every regret. And now he didn't want to impress. He wanted to build. An educational nonprofit invited Madison to join the training team. She accepted, with Oliver's support, who pledged to fund the programs through a new institute named in honor of her mother. "The most beautiful thing about roots," he said, "is that they grow in silence, but hold everything up." Madison squeezed his hand, because now they were growing together. On a rainy morning, she received an envelope with no sender. Inside, a single handwritten note. "I don't want you to be my hero. I want to be worthy of walking beside you." It was Oliver's handwriting, and those words were the most honest declaration she had ever heard. Not about possession, but partnership, about walking side by side, even with broken pasts and stitched-up hearts. That night, she knocked on his apartment door. When he opened it, she said nothing, just hugged him, and he understood. She didn't need promises. She needed presence. They stayed there, wrapped in each other for minutes that felt like a lifetime. It was the end of waiting, and the beginning of a love without masks, without games, without disguises. Days later, she wrote in her journal, "I didn't fall in love with a millionaire. I fell in love with a man who chose to see me, and let me see him too." That story, which began with mops and hidden notes, now moved toward a new chapter. Not perfect, but true. And that was enough. Oliver, reading the letter she had once left months ago, kept a copy in his wallet. Whenever he doubted himself, he'd reread, "To the one I still choose to see." It was the reminder that even in the shadows someone had seen him, and that was worth more than any public recognition. It was the foundation of everything. At the end of a long day, they sat together in the garden, the same light mist, the same bench as before. But now, hands intertwined, hearts at peace. "Do you still see me?" he whispered. Madison smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Always did. I just needed you to let me stay." And there, beneath the gray sky, the real beginning began. Time passed slowly, as if respecting the delicacy of what was growing between them. Madison and Oliver didn't define their relationship with labels, but with presence. He accompanied her to educational events, always discreetly, one step behind, letting her shine. Madison in turn began to trust again, without fear of being seen. She still carried scars, but now they didn't define her. They defined the road she had traveled, and he was walking that road with her, not above, but beside. One ordinary morning, she received an invitation to speak at a national education conference. Her reaction was one of surprise, followed by insecurity. "Am I really capable?" Oliver took her hands and said, "You weren't invited by chance. You were chosen because you're necessary." And for the first time, she truly believed in her worth. Not as the invisible girl from the night shift, but as a woman inspiring real change. While she prepared, he planned something quietly. A gesture without wealth or headlines. A gesture in her language, truth, respect, and memory. He visited the house where she grew up, talked to old neighbors, discovered stories from her childhood, and arranged for one of the public libraries she frequented as a girl to be restored. On the reopening day, he gave no speech, just left a small plaque. "For the girl who read in the dark and lit up the world." When Madison found out, her eyes filled with tears. She went there alone, telling no one. She walked among the shelves and recognized the smell of old wood and worn pages. She sat on the floor, just like she used to, and cried softly. Because someone had gone back in time to see her roots. And that gesture spoke louder than any declaration. It was a silent plea for permanence, and a reminder that she had never truly been alone, even when she thought she was. Days later, she asked Oliver to meet her in the same garden. She waited for him to sit, looked into his eyes, and said, "I forgive you. But more than that, I believe in you." He couldn't hold back his emotion. "Are you sure?" Madison nodded. "Not for everything you did for me, but for who you are when no one is watching." And in that moment, what existed between them transformed. From something fragile into something strong. From something beautiful into something lasting. The day of the conference arrived, and Madison took the stage with confidence. She spoke about education as an act of justice, about dignity, listening, and empathy. She didn't mention names, but those who knew her story understood who she meant when she said, "Sometimes what changes a life isn't what people say about you, but who chooses to truly see you." The audience gave a standing ovation, and at the back, Oliver smiled, with misty eyes. After the speech, she hugged him right there, unafraid of public gaze. The moment was captured by photographers, but for them it wasn't about headlines. It was about presence, about forgiveness, about real love, unadorned. He whispered in her ear, "Thank you for not giving up on me." She answered, "You showed me that sometimes the truest love is born from the most honest mistake." And there, in the middle of the stage, the audience witnessed something rare: love without performance. The weeks that followed were marked by simplicity. Dinners on the porch, walks through campus, late nights reading the same book. Madison, though now surrounded by invitations, never lost her essence. She kept visiting the Foundation's classrooms, talking to students, even wiping tables when Needed. Oliver, lighter than before, spent hours listening to stories he never knew existed. Day by day, he learned that loving meant learning, not controlling. A local newspaper published an article titled, "The Woman Who Changed an Empire with Grace." It was about her, about how Madison had reshaped an entire company's perspective. The piece praised her ethical strength, emotional intelligence, and ability to provoke change without raising her voice. She read it slowly, then folded the paper and said to Oliver, "I just did what my mother taught me. Treat people well, even those who don't know how to see you, because one day, someone will." At the Foundation's annual meeting, Oliver surprised everyone by stepping down as executive president. He said it was time to leave the numbers to those who understood them, and the heart to those who knew the value of every story. He announced the creation of the Madison Wells Program, a scholarship fund for working students. And at that moment, she cried, not for the name on the plaque, but for what it symbolized, for everything it meant. That night, they returned to the garden, the same bench now surrounded by planted flowers. They sat together in silence. Oliver pulled a small box from his pocket. But it wasn't a ring. It was a small key. "It's to the restored library. I want it to be yours, for wherever you want to go, but to always remember where you came from." Madison took the key and smiled. "I never forgot. And now, I have someone to return with." Slowly, they began planning the future, not with luxury but with roots. They wanted to open a new library branch in a small town. They wanted to reach young people who, like her once, needed to be seen. The decisions came slowly, but with certainty. They weren't empty promises. They were firm steps. Oliver was learning every day how to walk beside someone who didn't admire him for what he had, but for how he stayed quiet and listened. One day he took her to see a special place, an empty lot in a struggling part of the city. "I want to build a school here, but only if you agree to be its soul." Madison was speechless. "You want me to be the principal?" He smiled. "I want you to be the heart, the bridge, the inspiration." She cried, hugging him tightly. Because now it wasn't about giving. It was about building. Together at the symbolic groundbreaking ceremony, Madison gave a short speech. "We spend so much time trying to be somebody, but sometimes all we need is someone who sees us, someone who stays." And when she looked at Oliver in the crowd, she knew. He stayed, even when it was easier to run, even when hiding behind power would have been more convenient. He chose to stay. After the ceremony, they walked to the old campus cafeteria, sat at their usual table. She placed the library key on the table. He pulled out a crumpled note from his pocket, the first one he ever wrote. "You bring light where others only see shadows." She touched the paper as if touching her own story. "You were never just a janitor, and I was never just a simple girl." They both knew that now. That night, as rain fell outside, they danced in the NGO's meeting room to an old vinyl record. No loud music, no guests, just the two of them. He whispered, "I used to think I had to change the world, but all I needed was to change the way I saw it." She smiled. "And when we change how we see, everything changes with it." It was there, among soft steps and dim lights, that love found its purest form. Presence. The next day, they received a letter from the first group Madison had taught to read. Inside was an envelope filled with drawings, notes, and thank yous. One elderly man wrote, "You taught me to read, but more than that, you taught me that no one is too small to be remembered." She cried. Oliver read it in silence, and he promised himself he'd never let this woman forget the impact she made, even when she thought no one noticed. One quiet weekend, they climbed to the top of a hill near the city. From there, they could see everything they'd built together, and all they still dreamed of. They sat on the ground for hours, saying nothing. Oliver looked at her and said, You change me without shouting, you reach me without touching, and now you are my home. Madison squeezed his hand. And you are my ground. On the way back, they passed the school under construction. The walls were up, windows in place, life beginning. A child rode by on a bike and shouted, "Thank you, library lady." Madison laughed. Oliver did too. They needed nothing else. Because in that child's voice there was everything: recognition, gratitude, future. And that was what truly mattered, leaving behind something good, even on difficult roads. That night, they sat on the porch of the NGO, drinking tea under warm blankets. She rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for staying." He answered, "Thank you for seeing me." And there, under the quiet sky, they understood the greatest act of love is simply to stay. The day of the school's inauguration arrived with a clear sky and a soft breeze. Madison woke up early, ran her hands through her still damp hair, and looked out the window with shining eyes. It wasn't just a building. It was the realization of everything she had carried in her chest in silence for years. She hadn't just dreamed. She had built. Oliver met her at the door, wearing a simple dress, but with that look that always undid him. "Ready to change the world?" he whispered. "Together?" she replied. And they smiled. The ceremony was intimate, just as they had hoped. Teachers, volunteers, former students, children running through freshly painted halls, flowers in the garden. On the main wall, a phrase, "Every human being deserves to be seen." Madison stepped onto the small stage and spoke with conviction and emotion. This school was born from stories that don't fit in headlines. It was born from listening, from presence, and from the courage to truly see others. The audience gave a standing ovation. Oliver didn't take his eyes off her for a second. After the ceremony, they slipped away for a few minutes, walking to the small back porch. There, far from the crowd, Oliver pulled a small envelope from his pocket. "I thought I'd save this for our wedding day, but I realized love doesn't need a ritual to be real." Inside was a delicate ring with a light blue stone. "It belonged to my mother. She taught me to never lie about what matters." Madison smiled through tears. "And what matters now?" she asked. "You," he replied, "and everything that comes with you." Madison slid the ring onto her finger with symbolic care. There was no need for an altar to feel committed. They were bound by something invisible, yet unshakable. When they embraced, there was no crowd, no rush, no pressure. Just two hearts that had endured mistakes, secrets, shame, and hope, and still chose to stay. And in that silent embrace, they sealed something stronger than any vow. A love built on truth. As the months passed, the school grew. New classrooms, passionate teachers, students with stories that mirrored Madison's past. Oliver, now more involved in the human side of the project, spent afternoons listening to students, renovating spaces, and was simply called Mr. O, and he loved it. The useful anonymity, the quiet love that stayed. Madison joked, "You finally became the janitor you always wanted to be." He smiled. But now, with a heart badge. One special night, they hosted an open mic event for the students. Stories of resilience, poems, drawings. A 9-year-old boy read an essay titled, "The Girl Who Read in the Dark." It was about Madison. She cried at the end and hugged the boy like she was holding her past self. Oliver watched her, captivated as always. And in that moment, he understood. She never needed saving, just space to bloom. And he had finally learned to be that space. An unexpected email arrived. An international university wanted to award the project global recognition. Madison was hesitant. "I don't like stages, I like solid ground." Oliver held her face in his hands. "But sometimes, the ground you walk on needs to be lit, so others know they can walk too." She accepted, not for pride, but for the voices echoing through hers. At the ceremony, she walked onto the stage in a packed theater. Oliver sat in the audience, navy suit, misty eyes. I don't stand here for myself. I represent every young person who scrubbed school floors while believing they'd one day teach in one. I represent everyone who was judged by appearance but triumphed through essence. The crowd wept. It was as if her words washed the world clean, and Oliver felt pride. But more than that, gratitude. After the event, she pulled him aside. "You know what I realized, Oliver?" He smiled. "What?" She leaned her forehead to his. "I'm not the simple girl from the cafeteria, and you were never just the hidden millionaire. We're two mended hearts that learned how to stitch together." He kissed her there, like sealing an eternal beginning, like saying, "Nothing else matters but this moment." In a symbolic gesture, he gave up his luxury penthouse and moved into a modest home near the school. He wanted to be where his life made sense. Madison still lived in her same apartment, but with new colors, new paintings, new books. They shared weekends, grocery runs, porch talks. They were a real couple, no filters. And that made it rare and beautiful. One day, while cleaning an old school cabinet, Madison found the first note he ever wrote. It was tucked between old books. "You bring light where others only see shadows." She read it silently, eyes sparkling, and thought, "How lucky to be seen before I was visible. How lucky to love someone willing to relearn." She placed the note in a simple frame and hung it in the library. As a reminder, as a home. Oliver, meanwhile, found the old letters she wrote but never gave. They were in a wooden box with his name. He read them all, one by one, heart racing. He cried at some, laughed at others, and realized her love had always been there, even when she doubted it. He just had to be brave enough to stay long enough to deserve it. Now, finally, he was. The following spring, they organized the first Invisible Voice Festival, a gathering where students, staff, homeless people, and professionals from all walks shared their stories. It felt like all boundaries disappeared. Madison stepped on stage and said, "The world changes when we listen, but it truly blooms when we choose to stay." Oliver applauded with tears in his eyes, as he always did. A journalist asked him backstage, "Do you miss your old life?" He answered calmly, "I do, but only until I remember her smile." The journalist pressed, "Would you give all this up for her?" Oliver smiled gently. "No, because I already did. And in return, I got a life that finally makes sense." It was the first time he said it out loud, and it had never felt so right. On the school's one-year anniversary, they hosted a small celebration. Madison had written a speech but spoke from the heart instead. "Today, I'm not celebrating a building. I'm celebrating every look that didn't turn away, every hand that held on, every love that chose to learn, and especially every person who didn't give up even when ignored." Oliver hugged her afterward. She whispered, "Thank you for not leaving me in the dark." On an ordinary Sunday, they went back to the garden where it all began. They sat on the same bench, Madison barefoot, reading a book. Oliver watching the leaves dance in the trees. "Do you think this will last?" she asked. "If we last, it's worth it," he replied. And they both knew. There were no more doubts. Their love wasn't for show. It had roots. Years later, they were invited to share their story at a university. A student asked, "What's the secret to love that lasts?" Oliver looked at Madison, who smiled. "It's not a secret," he said. "It's presence, it's listening, it's choosing to learn how to love the same person again every day." And Madison added, "It's not giving up, even when they mess up, even when it hurts, it's staying." When they left the auditorium, they passed the old cafeteria. Same sign, same tables. They walked in and sat at their usual spot. The waiter, unaware of their story, asked, "The usual?" Madison laughed. "Yes, always." And there, between sips of coffee, the past met, the present. No bitterness, no masks, just love. At the school entrance, a new wooden plaque read, Here, we don't just teach letters, we teach how to see. That was Madison and Oliver's legacy. A legacy built with small gestures, many tears, honest mistakes, and deep forgiveness. Love that survived disguise, judgment, and then chose to remain. Because in the end, what truly changes a life is being seen and chosen every single day. They walk hand in hand down the school hallway. Laughter of children echoes, walls covered in drawings, windows open to the world. Oliver stops for a moment and says, "If I had to do it all over again." Madison interrupts, smiling. "Let it always be with you, even in the dark." And he replies, "Especially in the dark." And then they walk on, together, forever. Did this story touch your heart? Then don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who believes in the power of love built on truth and presence. Sometimes all someone needs is to be seen, and you can be that light for someone today. Subscribe to the channel for more moving stories like this, like, comment, and turn on the notification bell, because every week new stories will warm your heart and renew your faith in love that transforms, heals, and stays.